Good morning.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm saying morning, but it's afternoon. You're right.
I thought you were in the West Coast.
No, in my mind, maybe, but I'm actually on the East Coast.
All right, cool. I'm in DC.
Okay, cool.
Mhm.
So I'm going to say welcome to God and Matter. I'm Arlene J.M. your host, and today I have Tykee James, and we're going to do some talking and let's get acquainted. Tykee, who are you?
Most people know me as a human. I guess that's what I am. I don't know. That's such a strange question. Who am I?
I know it is a strange question. It's one that we're probably all having opportunity to answer these days.
Well, I think I have multiple answers to the question. It's just an interesting way to start. I'm going to start with Tykee James. That's who I am.
Okay, and what makes you Tykee James?
I knew that was going to be the next question. That's why I started there. That was my name that was given to me at birth.
Did you ever think about changing your name?
Of course not. I'm not that creative, but also it's pretty original. So there's not a lot of other people that have to worry about with the name.
So what does Tykee mean?
It means nothing. It has no actual meaning. It was completely made up by my parents,
Well,
who
it means
just wanted
something
to
to
have.
them. It means something to them, right?
No. It has like no actual like. I am the meaning of Tykee James.
Okay.
Like it was just made up at the time.
Okay. So
Mhm.
Tykee, what do you do? What drives you? What inspires you?
Well, what I do is I am a government affairs coordinator for National Audubon Society. That keeps me out of trouble. I also watch birds a lot. What were the other questions?
Okay, so you're the national coordinator for government affairs for the Audubon
Mhm.
Society. So
Yes.
what does that require you to do?
For me, it's a lot of moving data around. Data on members of Congress, data on Audubon Society members, data on talking points for meeting with members of Congress. In short, or at least the way I like to concisely say what I do, I'm a lobbyist. Like I spend time talking to lawmakers about the laws that they should make, and the particular laws that I talk about are bird related, environmental. They're environmental, but birds are the vehicle.
Okay. So what got you interested in birds? I'm a bird lover myself, but what is your
In
interest?
high school, I was offered a job to work at an environmental center to be an environmental educator and a community organizer, and I took that job, and I had that job for most of college, and then it kind of turned into a hobby after that, and then the next thing I know, I'm in DC watching birds and lobbying, basically.
Cool. So what is lobbying for you? Because a lot of people have negative ideas with lobbying, and
And they
not
should.
all lobbying is bad. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, you should have a bad idea of lobbying. People lobby because constituents don't do it enough. Now, lobbying for me has an IRS definition that I don't necessarily meet the threshold of. Like, I don't spend that many hours where the IRS would classify what I'm doing as lobbying. But the best way to explain what I do, people who aren't in the industry, is just by saying lobbying, because people know what that means. I'm talking to lawmakers that aren't my elected officials. Like I didn't vote for them, but I'm trying to get them to vote for things or trying to get them to support things that I think is good for their constituents and their members and for the entire country and things like that. And like a lobbyist can work to organize constituents to advocate the member, to do something. Like as a lobbyist, let's say I had a lobbying firm, I could buy a bus and then bus a bunch of people to DC, give them a bunch of talking points, tell them to meet with their members. Obviously that takes a lot of data to make that happen. And what I do with National Audubon is a lot of the logistics behind the scenes, data moving around.
Awesome. So with constituents, you said if they did more, what kinds of things do you think constituents should be doing in order
Well,
to protect birds or the environment?
I think it's always important to have a voice on the day of voting. That always sets a mandate for something. But the day of voting, whenever that day is, whether that's your primary election locally or the general election nationally, the folks can do more in voicing their support or opposition to things that their elected official supports or opposes. If I could come up with a number off the top of my head, I would say maybe less than 20% of a congressional district's constituency do something to have their voice heard to the elected official. So there's 80% of people who don't have a voice, who haven't used their voice, or who are disenfranchised from using their voice. And, holding all else equal in a different world, what if it was 80% of constituents who always had their voice heard? What would that mean of the elected officials? Would that be more accountability? Would that be more reflective democracy? Would that be more polarization? I don't know. But I know that the lobbying industry exists because the concentration of power, and by power, I mean voice to lawmakers to do things, is definitely balanced more heavily towards money and resources that you have, and not so much, you being a constituent. The virtue of you being a constituent doesn't give you the same gravity in your voice as a huge lobbying firm or a huge lobbying industry. I mean, I think that the two can work together, but when people have bad impressions of the word lobbying, I think they should, because if you let lobbyists decide everything, then constituents aren't. I don't know if every lobbyist has every interest that's best for the most people in mind, but they're the ones who can afford to be in DC and talk to the member and, get, and always be there and constantly be the squeaky wheel. And most constituents don't have that ability just to use your 9 to 5 hours to get a member of Congress to do something. Most people don't work in lobbying. Most people work everywhere else.
Okay. So when you say 80% of the people don't exercise their voice, that's a large number, a really large number.
That was an arbitrary number I made up from the 20%.
Okay, right. Well, assuming that
that was totally
20 is 100. Just assuming that even if it's one person that doesn't exercise their voice, that matters, that counts, because we are a democracy. So the question is, how do you mobilize those who are not exercising their voice?
I think there's a lot. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And it's interesting that you work with the Audubon Society, because back in the day, carrier pigeons sent messages around and people used birds to communicate. So this is your opportunity to help people to understand how to communicate.
I think there's multiple answers to your first question, and a little bit of history about the Audubon Society. We started because, one, the name Audubon, he was known, he's still known as a world-renowned artist of bird illustrations. And in the early 1900s, late 1800s, there were a bunch of folks. It was popular to have a feather on your cap, or use bird feathers. And the killing of birds started to be an issue when you started to look at what happened to the passenger pigeon that was extinct, that was wiped out by people eating the passenger pigeon, killing the passenger pigeon to eat it. And the women who came together for bird conservation initially came in that context to say that we need to do more to protect these birds. And the name Audubon was just a popular name to do that under. And then we started first with the idea that we need to protect migratory birds that don't live in the US forever, but they mostly live in South America, or they go all the way up to Canada. And we need to do more to protect the migratory birds. And the Migratory Bird Treaty Act was something that started in I'm not going to guess the exact year, but it's been over 100 years. It's one of the oldest environmental laws, the one that we call the bedrock environmental law, because that's what brought the organization together for bird conservation. Now, the first question is to how do you mobilize people? I think, there's multiple answers to that, because there are congressional districts where most of the people in that congressional district are incarcerated. And depending on what state you live in, those incarcerated individuals may not have a vote. Now, should they have a vote? How do you mobilize people from inside a prison? How do you get them, updated on the issues and who to vote for and what does it matter? And then there's also different congressional districts where you see that everyone only cares about one issue, and mobilizing around that one issue is probably the most strategic way, where you might go to a different congressional district that may be in a city, and maybe most of those folks in that congressional district only care about city issues. So they're not worried about what the federal government is doing and over there. They only care about what's happening in the city. So to some degree, mobilizing different groups of people needs to be, or not to some degree, I think absolutely, if you're mobilizing people to vote or to take some type of advocacy action, you should consider the context that you're in. But I think universally, the best way to mobilize people is around an issue that can make a real difference in their life.
Okay.
It just depends on what that life is,
Yeah, you spoke about the power of voting, and voting is how we in a democratic society create change, whether it be the lawmakers or us making decision upon laws. So when I was in law school, you have to write a certification paper and to graduate, and so it's like doing a doctoral dissertation.
Ooh,
and I chose the.
That's scary.
It can be scary. I had to change professors in the midst of mine. And I wrote on one man, one vote. And it was before the Voting Rights Act was suspended or not renewed. And people thought, oh, that's kind of crazy. Why are you caring about that? And when I look at how we've progressed as a society, the fact that we don't have an active protection for the rights of all persons to vote is something that is alarming. And the fact that the people are quiet about it is also alarming. But some people just don't care.
Yeah, unfortunate. I mean, I think apathy has corners in everybody's mind. Like, I'm apathetic towards certain issues because, one, they probably don't mean anything to me. Even if they're solved as an issue, that probably doesn't affect me. There's some issues that I just don't know about that also don't affect me. But if I knew about them, I might care. And then obviously there are issues that I care about because they affect me. And people, I think, maybe are not transparent with their own idea of self-interest. Like, self-interest isn't a bad thing. It's something that I think if you're transparent with, you can, at least understand your own sympathy or understand your own empathy on certain issues. I think that they're on the question of the Voting Rights Act not being renewed a couple years ago. I think that there's a lot of missing teeth in the perfect smile of the Constitution.
I love that. I love that. There's a lot of teeth missing in the perfect Constitution.
In the perfect smile of the Constitution.
That's awesome.
Now, some teeth are a little more crooked than others. So sometimes we just need braces before we fill stuff in. But I definitely think that's the battle. That's what we existed. That it's something that what we want has to be worth fighting for. And when it's worth fighting for and we win, we know that that's going to make meaningful differences in people's lives. Like making sure every person has the right to vote, or, depending on your philosophical theory of constitution or who should be president. I know that there are folks who believe that me in particular, the requirement of the president to be a naturally born citizen is kind of useless. I mean, I understand why it was there when the country first began, because I guess you didn't want someone from the British Army running for president, being president and saying, okay, actually America doesn't exist. We're going to go back. I get that, fine, whatever. We're a little further from that now that we're 240 some years in. But, there's just a lot of work that can be done when we're talking about what laws we currently have, what laws we don't have. And we're just like, wait, why don't we have that? And then, and also how we interpret laws, because some laws exist as they exist, but how we interpret them means something not to what maybe the intended writers of that law meant, or the interpretation of it can just change this way today. Now it's this way tomorrow. And then, what's that mean? I don't know yet.
I think the Constitution should be progressive, and I do think that it should be a living document, because we change over time, and so should the Constitution. The framework, the essence of it, essentially should be the same goal, but the goal sometimes needs to be secured by additional provisions. So I love what you said. There are missing teeth in the perfect smile of the Constitution.
And with the Constitution too, I mean, I think the Constitution has two goals that conflict each other every now and then. The first goal of the Constitution is to protect people. And the second goal of the Constitution is to define the institution. And the institution is the three branches of government. Some people might say four branches if you include the Electoral College. And there are just so many things in the definition of the institution that people think missing. not right, it needs to be amended. And then there's stuff on the side of protecting people that people think are missing, wrong, or needs to be amended. I mean, even in the Bill of Rights, I think the first five are about people, as in like what people can do. And then the next five are about what the government cannot do or should not do, or whatever it is. Like there's just ways that I've seen the Constitution broken down that show, I don't think in a bad way, but I think it shows the necessary, if not always present conflict between what the people want and what the institution wants, or what's best for the institution. Not that those are always at conflict, but that's what brings issues to the Supreme Court. Questions that are fundamentally about what can people do, what can the institution do. And obviously the institution, that's whatever it is at the time, because sometimes it's the executive branch, sometimes it's the legislative branch, whatever the institution is. So I think it always comes down to those things. And I think it always should, or I think it always will. And how we resolve those problems, I think does rely on a philosophy that the Constitution is a living and breathing document, because the folks that made it many years ago still owned slaves, and we cannot take their judgment perfectly. That's why we have an amendment process to the Constitution, because we can add and take away things like prohibition. Remember that? We added that, and then we took it away. Like we learned. That's a perfect example I love to use and how we learn, besides slavery or suffrage, or because like even the idea of suffrage, black men had the right to vote before black women. So it was just like, well, I mean, before any women. So it's like black men could vote, and then later white men could vote, and then later, kind of everybody else, So it's just like there's still missing teeth, there's still crooked teeth, but it's the mouth that we're working with, and we have to eat.
This is true. I love the way you put that together. That's really brilliant. So with all of this legislative knowledge, did you study like history or constitutional law, or how did you get into what you're doing?
Well, when I went to college, I was a math and computer science major, but I wasn't good at either of the two. I wanted to be a math teacher when I graduated, but now I'm here. The knowledge, or the trivial knowledge of my understanding of the Constitution and my perspective on certain things have just come from listening to podcasts and going to museums and typical information sources that don't include reading long, boring textbooks.
That's a powerful thing that you said, because a lot of times people think you have to go to college to have knowledge, and you can get knowledge in college.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many other sources and resources that are available. The internet has good information, bad information, and powerful information.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an opportunity for a lot of people who have nothing to do or additional time on their hands to learn, to become more aware of what's going on, not just the trend phrases of being woke or whatever, but to understand what that means to be woke and why you need to be woke. Not uproar over an incident or event, but to understand really what our rights are.
Mm-hmm. I have a friend who kind of told me this when he used to do this thing when he was a kid, and he was pretty young when he was a kid. I mean, everybody was young when they were a kid. I mean, when he was a kid, it was a long time ago. That's what I mean to say. He would pull out encyclopedias, and he would just be like, okay, today we're going to learn everything that starts with an S. What's this? Okay. What's that? Okay, cool. And then when he found something that was like particularly exciting, which, he would later find out he was really interested in wildlife. So when he got to snake or snail or whatever animal starts with an S, he would just research that animal more than he would research the other things that started with an S. He could have researched more anything in that encyclopedia, but he was just more attracted to that. And he wouldn't have found that out if he didn't just almost blindly walk through this encyclopedia, just kind of window shopping. And I think people have more time for that, just to like blindly scroll through an encyclopedia. But instead of an encyclopedia, you can use your phone or your laptop or whatever device you have that gives you access to information that doesn't already exist in your head. But a lot of what I learned prior to coronavirus, when I was just in the same kind of mindset of like, I'm not someone who gets bored. I'm someone who's going to go find something interesting. And what I found interesting was the Constitution, or understanding legislative advocacy or understanding legislative mechanisms. And then those kind of things just stuck to me. And then now I have a job where all that information is kind of relevant.
That's cool. When I was a kid, my mom, she actually, I remember in the living room, she had these bookshelves, and there was the World Book Encyclopedia set that she had for us. And it was our responsibility to study from those encyclopedias on our own. It wasn't like a teacher assignment. My mom wanted to make sure that we were empowered. My parents were like, education was really important. It is.
And it always should be.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents now should take time to consider if they're bored, to get knowledge for themselves, but also making sure that their children, if they're bored, have that access as well. And I was just checking the other day, in addition to Wikipedia, Britannica has an online series available. So people can go to encyclopedias online, and share that knowledge and do what your friend did, if they're so inclined. And they're using their time wisely. So tell me more about birds and conservation. When you watch birds, what does that entail? What do you get from that? Like emotionally, physically, mentally? What happens to you?
Well, to begin, I'm someone who's been birding since, I've been birding for almost a decade now. And so but I still consider myself a novice birder. It's just something that I have been doing. It's not something that I consider myself a pro at, but where I fit in the middle ground of my experience, I like to say, is I can appreciate any bird while knowing what it is, because I'm not so advanced that I'm like, oh, that's just a, whatever. And then I move on. And I can also appreciate the more rare birds, but I'm also not chasing them out. So birding for most people, I think, is just a hobby, as it is, but it can be a sport. It can be like a competition to see who can see the most birds in a day, who can see the most birds in the day with the lowest carbon footprint, who can see the most birds in the day in a zip code or a geographic area. There's just so many ways that you can have fun with that type of competition. It's also, to some people, like a recreational album of their lives, because some people keep a life list, and obviously some life lists are longer than others. And when someone can look at their entire life list and see the birds that they've seen, or just look at the names of the birds that they've seen, they can have a mental image of that bird, a mental image of that memory, where it was, what they ate that day, whatever it was. And that's something that people just collect. It's like a personal memory collection device. But for me, it started out as a job. And I enjoyed it as a job because it was just like, wow, I get to be paid to go outside and watch birds and teach people about birds. And now it's more of a hobby, even though it is also my job now. It's a hobby for me personally, where I get to have fun answering questions like, what is that bird? And then I look, I might know what it is. And if I don't immediately know what it is, I try to ask myself more questions like, well, what does it look like? What are the field marks? What are the principles of identification that can help me deduce what bird this is? So for me, I can enjoy it as like a small puzzle if I don't immediately know what the bird is. But, as I said, because I enjoy it so much as a job as well, I use it as a tool to tell stories and to tell people how important it is to protect the environment. And most of the time that I'm watching birds, I'm doing it with people who are watching birds for the first time. And I find a lot of enjoyment watching birds with first-time birders, to answer a lot of those questions.
So a couple of things. I know you're dedicated to it. You and I met at the Citizens Climate Lobby Conference. And I believe
good context.
The temperature was maybe 15 degrees outside.
That was the coldest.
You went out birding in 15-degree Fahrenheit weather, which is not friendly, comfortable. I didn't go.
I wore gloves. And a hat. I was warm for a while.
I'm impressed with your dedication. Now, you mentioned field marks for birds. You mentioned birds with low carbon footprint. What does that mean? I didn't know that birds created carbon footprints and that we should be aware of to say low versus high versus, normal. And for those who don't know, what are field marks?
So field marks are what you would use to describe how something looks. Like, if you were to describe me, how do you know you're looking at Tykee? He's wearing a black and white checkered shirt. That's a field mark. It's very specific. It'd be very different if I was wearing a green shirt. In the same way that like a bird, it's just like, well, I know that's a bird, but that one has stripes on it and that one has polka dots. So like that's a unique field mark identifier for the bird. Now you can get a lot more specific from that because and actually I say field marks and not color because color is just like one type of field mark. But there are so many birds that are the same color that you just can't just say, oh, it's a brown bird. That doesn't help. Like it helps when you start to understand the shape of the bird. You start to understand some of the, like I said, field marks, which can be stripes, it can be spots, it can be like a completely, one color, half color, like, all the different designs of birds. And then that's when you can get into ornithology. Ornithology is a scientific study of birds where there are specific names for specific parts of the wing. And then there are specific names for, specific field marks that are scientific in name, like a supercilia is basically an eyebrow for a Carolina wren. That's easier to see and point at when it's present, but like I don't say the scientific term unless it's in front of me. Otherwise, it's just a waste of time. And I think the same thing, works in general when you're talking about like scientific language versus regular people language, because most of the time I'm watching birds with first-time birders. But if I was with advanced birders, they might use a lot more of that. And I would find that rewarding because I'm learning that, and I'm interacting with that now. But that's the idea of field marks. Field marks really help. You identify a bird, especially when birds are so similar. Some birds they just have one little thing that this one has that this one doesn't. And you need to know if you see that field mark. That's how you know it's the other bird. Also, sound. And I want to clarify, when I said in the scope of talking about birding as a sport, as a competition, when you're watching birds as a competition, a stipulation that you can make is your team or you personally have to track your carbon footprint. So if you drive a car versus riding a bike, if you take public transportation versus, taking a lift or a carpool, like how much of your personal carbon footprint did you release or what's the size of your carbon footprint in your activity of watching birds?
Okay, I get it now. Mm-hmm. I was like, how can a bird have a carbon?
Yeah. I meant to clarify that. It's just like a cool stipulation. It's just like, I got second place in seeing the most birds, but I got first place in the lowest carbon footprint. And obviously I think that's something most birders care about because most birders care about the environment. So it's kind of easy for a lot of birders to also be bikers for that reason.
Yeah, cool. I love birds. Actually, they're building a nest outside my house. For some reason, they do it every few years. They'll build either in my backyard, they'll put a nest, or they'll put one in front of the house. And I like it. I like it because it's like happy and chirping. And I've noticed during this quieter time that we have as a society, the birds seem to be so happy. They are just fluttering around and singing and chirping, and it's kind of wonderful to me. Why are birds important for the environment?
Well, I first want to say that the birds that you're hearing, a lot of them are coming because it's spring migration. So like it kind of just lined up that the most active time for birds is around the same time that people are staying at home all day. But to answer your question, birds are an indicator species. And there are a lot of indicator species that exist in different niches in ecology. But I know, at least I've been told, that if you see birds, often that means that's a good environment for them. They have a place to nest, like your house. They have a place to eat food or to at least gather food to bring to their nest. It's not too cold or it's not too hot for them. And they can find and have viable mating partners. And when, elements and certain characteristics like that are fulfilled for a bird in a certain space, that's like I think that's almost the definition of their habitat. So whenever their habitat is endangered, one of those things are in jeopardy, then we see less birds. And then when we see less birds, we also can see that the environment is probably also in jeopardy in general. It's just like, well, if we're seeing less birds here, that also means that there's less places for them to nest because deforestation or these birds that normally migrate to this lake are not migrating to this lake anymore because we allowed this lake to get more salt than it needs. And because it has more salt, there's less insects for the birds to eat. So the birds aren't coming here. And because there's less insects that can be eaten, this entire lake turns into just like a toxic, there's no life. It may look look like a peaceful lake, but there's no fish, there's no insect, like there's nothing in it. It's just a puddle of water that's overglorified at that point. So birds can be an indicator species for some that let you know the conditions of the environment. But as I said, birds are a reflection of something else, or it can be like the second or third step indication of it, the environment. Because first you have to cut down a tree before you ruin a nest, or first the bugs have to die for the birds not to go there. So there's tons of indicator species out there. Birds just happen to be among the most marketable.
I see. Our time is coming to a close, and you've offered a lot of great information, which I appreciate. If you had to think about what inspires you and motivates you to be you, what would that be?
I really do enjoy meeting people and learning different perspectives in the world. Even though I'm not someone who likes traveling a lot, I am someone who can reach into a small book and find a whole bunch of new perspectives, like your book.
Awesome.
That was a very short book, but like from that book, I've reached into a whole plethora of perspectives that I hadn't really considered before. So for me, knowing how big the room is on information and perspectives and live experiences is exciting because, I understand only a couple of years into life, I'm just walking into the room. Well, I mean, I think I'm a decent amount of steps in, but there's so much more to explore. And for me, that's kind of fun. I love answering questions, and I love, not because I have the answer, but because I love finding the answer. I love figuring out the answer. And it's just like, well, where is that? That's a good question. Or, I've never thought of that question to this answer, or I never thought about that answer coming to this question that way. For me, that's pretty fun. And that's something that has always consistently has kept my attention.
Cool. Now, you mentioned my book. For those who don't know, I wrote a children's book called The Truth About Humpty Dumpty, and Tykee is speaking about that. So thank you so much. That's very kind to say. With regard to, and there are birds in that book, they are the storytellers.
A little biased on my part, but yes, it is true. I do like it though.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. You put a lot of my heart and soul into that. So, of things that I've asked you, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you would want people to know?
Yes, I am left-handed.
Oh, I love that you're left-handed.
Just need people to know.
It's
left-handed.
It's a rarity. When I was a kid, my brother was left-handed, right? He's still, I think he's ambidextrous.
Yeah, he's still in.
Yeah, but he's ambidextrous as a surgeon, right? So I felt bad because there weren't a lot of left-handed people in the world. So I used to try to write with my left hand so that he wouldn't be alone.
Solidarity. We need that solidarity. Thank you.
I have like a special place in my heart for lefties in the world. So
Me too.
Tykee, you're an outstanding person. I love that you're a young man doing such great things in the world, the environment.
Well, I'm so happy that we could do this together. I mean, it was, I know that the broken ankle really slowed me down from things, but I'm glad that we could catch up and talk about things. And, I hope you show me the next projects that you're working on.
I will. One thing, your broken ankle, how are you managing with that? This is a stressful time and you seem so relaxed and chill. How are you so relaxed?
My girlfriend. She has been so helpful and patient and supportive of like my recovery since, January. And it has been a challenge. I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that there weren't challenges associated with having a broken ankle and then knowing that you have a broken ankle, but with her and how we've been together, it's something that, for someone who's broke his bone for the first time, I think everything in this experience is remarkable, but I don't know how to describe how our relationship together has gotten stronger without saying, obviously that's remarkable, but even more remarkable or fascinating. I don't really have the language to describe how grateful I am of her and how thankful I am of her support, and as well as the support of my friends and family who've checked in, as well as you. And I've had some fun with it. I've been able to tell some jokes. For example, a lot of folks. So when I broke my ankle in January, a lot of folks were kind of not jealous, but they were like, "Oh, Tykee's not going to be in the office anymore. He's just going to be sitting at home all day." And everyone's having fun, going out to the bars, they're drinking, and all I see is their pictures on social media. So now everyone has a theory that I created the coronavirus so that everyone stays home. And when the coronavirus outbreak ends, that's when my ankle will be better. And then that's when at least that's the idea. I don't know. But I, now that like, since I've been working from home at least a month or two in advance of everyone, I'm like, everyone else who's working from home is coming in. They're just like, oh my God, this is so sad. And I'm like, I've been doing this for 2 months. Like, you'll be fine. And like, I've been doing this because I have a broken ankle. There's nothing wrong with you right now. And there shouldn't be anything wrong with you if you stay home. Like, so it's just like, it's hard for me to sympathize, but you'll be all right. Like, it's going to suck. Yes. Let's not ignore the sucky part of it. That's going to happen. But also, you will be fine.
So, Tykee, you're telling people to be positive, and you're definitely positive. I didn't want to mention your broken ankle. I wanted to give you that opportunity. You were informative. You didn't wince, nothing. You stuck through it. And that is the idea and the champion that you are.
Well, thank you.
Well,
Really blush.
it's a good thing to be, and it seems that love has carried you through. One of the principles that I have is that love is what unites us and builds us. You have that support. When I sent you that text to check on you, I'm like, how are you? I was glad to hear that you were, and I'm even more glad that we had this opportunity to talk.
I mean, this is why we choose love, right?
Yes. And Choose Love is a song that I have out with Tim Ellis. And thank you for that plug.
You gotta have the plugs. You gotta have the plugs.
Thank you. So remember to choose love, choose kindness and empathy, choose to protect the environment, and choose to watch out for Tykee James and
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm really glad we could do this.
Me too. And I will be in touch with you soon.
Okay, very well. I look forward to it.
God bless. Take care. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
I hope that you enjoyed listening to Tykee James, a political millennial who has a love for birds and lobbies for the National Audubon Society. Tykee has a very interesting perspective on things. As a lawyer, I was intrigued by his definition of the Constitution having an imperfect smile and missing teeth. It is missing teeth, and as a living document, we need to address that so that there's opportunity and equality for all persons. We also address the issue of the environment and birds and what he loves. He chose love, and that directs and that guides him. I would encourage you to do the same. Tykee mentioned the truth about Humpty Dumpty. That book is a heartfelt project for me, and it encourages people to choose love, to have inclusion and diversity, to shy away from bullying and things that are lesser than what we are. Now, in the story, the birds, which historically have been messengers, are the storytellers. Birds are a good indication, as Tykee spoke about, of the condition of the society. I hope that you will walk away with the moment of thinking about how can you raise the love vibration and the messages to be positive and inclusive for our society. Our next guest is going to be Linda Bobolik. Linda Bobolik helps people to find their zest for life. It was an interesting interview, and I hope that you will enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening to God and Matter. God and Matter is produced by Arlene Speaks Media, LLC, and available on YouTube and distributed by Castbox.fm. Please visit our